The last embers of twilight clung to the high spires of the Red Keep like dying fireflies, tracing the outline of King's Landing in a haze of flickering orange. Petyr Baelish, known in common parlance as Littlefinger, stood upon a narrow balcony that jutted from Maegor's Holdfast, gazing down at the city as though he already owned every stone, every alley, and every hapless soul scurrying below. The hush of dusk, broken by the occasional cry of a raven or the clang of a distant tradesman's hammer, set his mind alight with 1,000 secret possibilities. In the stillness, he could almost taste the next move, feel the shape of the board shifting beneath his feet. He wore the shadow of a smile upon his lips, that hint of sly amusement that so few could interpret. Once, it had been no more than a smirk of self-satisfaction, crafted to hide the wounds of his youth. Now it had grown teeth, like a wolf, like a lion, like a stag, and that ambition, honed by the cunning that had made him master of coin and eventually the Lord Protector of the Vale, now cast its shadow upon the empty seat of House Baratheon. Few in the Seven Kingdoms yet realized what chaos brewed behind the mild expression he wore. Fewer still knew how easily Petyr Baelish manipulated them, spinning illusions and forging alliances that would soon light a fire under the stony ramparts of King's Landing. In the silent gloom of the corridor behind him, a single torch flickered, revealing the entrance to his solar, one of many he inhabited within the Red Keep. Although he was no longer part of the small council, and though the power game had taken unpredictable turns since the War of the Five Kings, his influence had only grown more insidious. Some whispered that the new king found him indispensable, while others believed he harbored ambitions that dwarfed the very Iron Throne itself. Littlefinger had never disabused them of such notions. Indeed, on nights like this, when he stood on his balcony and gazed down at a city that had been conquered by dragons and convulsed by the might of Lannisters, Tyrells, and Baratheons, he felt more certain than ever that his grand plan would soon unfold. He turned, leaving the panoramic view of King's Landing behind. Each footstep across the polished floor rang hollow in the corridor. His solar was a small room, intentionally chosen, tucked away so that only the most knowledgeable could find it. He lit another candle from the torch on the wall, its sudden flare of light illuminating a table scattered with parchments. On one of them lay the meticulously drawn genealogical lines of House Baratheon, a swirl of names and birth dates, tracing back to Orys Baratheon, rumored brother to the first Targaryen king. Petyr ran a fingertip down the lines, following them like a weaver studying a pattern, looking for the knots and the loose threads where he could insert his illusions. He had always prided himself on discovering secrets in the darkest corners, truths overlooked by scholars and lords alike. But what he planned now extended beyond secrets. He intended to fabricate an entire bloodline, his own. In the chaos that had followed the downfall of Lord Stannis and the subsequent death or disappearance of the Baratheon progeny, the seat of Storm's End stood precariously unclaimed. True, there was talk of Gendry Waters, King Robert's bastard, but Gendry was untrained in politics and held little clout except among a few sentimental loyalists. Yet the blood in Gendry's veins was no small thing. It was an obstacle that needed either co-option or elimination if Petyr was to place himself at the head of House Baratheon. Casting the candlelight across the genealogical parchments, Petyr's mind turned. One rumor said House Baratheon's line carried the same blood that once flowed in the veins of Targaryens. Another rumor said the line came from the Storm Kings of old. Petyr did not care which legend was true. A well-crafted lie was often as powerful as the truth. He let his smile grow broader as his hand lingered on an empty space on the parchment. He could not simply claim Baratheon lineage outright. Men and women of the court would demand proof. And that proof was precisely what he intended to fabricate. He had purchased knowledge from Pycelle's old notes, from half-forgotten entries in the book The Lineages and Histories of the Great Houses of the Seven Kingdoms, and from the secret diaries of septas and maesters who had once served at Storm's End. Carefully, piece by piece, he had woven a tale of a distant cousin from the Stormlands who had perished in anonymity, leaving behind an heir in the Vale. With the right documents and the right persuasive methods, discretionary coin, blackmail, or the promise of land, a handful of gullible or greedy maesters would sign letters attesting to this lineage. A laugh escaped his lips, soft and cunning, as the candle made shadows dance on the table. The cost of forging a royal bloodline would be substantial, but not beyond the coffers at his disposal. The Vale's resources, combined with his personal fortune, would feed this monstrous lie. He would appear the last surviving offshoot of a little-known branch of Baratheon, seamlessly connected to an overlooked third son or a wayward daughter from decades past. He glanced at the door to ensure no one lurked in the hall, though he seldom needed to worry. The hush around him was absolute. The only presence was Lares, his private messenger, who waited in the anteroom beyond, poised to deliver the next set of instructions. It had taken months to gather the scattered threads. Now everything was poised for the grand reveal. Yet Peter reminded himself to tread with caution. A single mistake in forging such a claim might doom him forever. He extinguished the candle and stepped back into the corridor. "Lares," he called softly, and a slim youth padded forward, hair pulled back tight, revealing anxious eyes. "The letters for the maesters are ready," Littlefinger said, barely above a whisper. "See that they are delivered tonight, along with the coin and the gifts I've arranged." "Yes, my lord," Lares answered, bowing so deeply that his hair brushed the stone floor. He took the letters from Peter's hand and was gone, silent as a cat. Peter remained still for a moment longer, listening to the quickened heartbeat in his ears. He allowed himself a small moment of reflection. Claiming House Baratheon would spark outrage, confusion, and no small measure of conflict. It was precisely what he desired. Let the lords and ladies scramble, let them question the validity of his claim while he secured the loyalty of Storm's End's garrison. And in that swirl of distrust, one swift stroke could put the Stormlands under his banner. Outside, the wind picked up, fluttering the heavy drapes. Littlefinger found himself remembering the storms that had once hammered the battlements of Storm's End. He had never been inside that sturdy fortress, but he had heard how its thick walls withstood siege after siege, how the raging tempests of Shipbreaker Bay had shaped the Baratheons into hardy warriors and cunning statesmen. Something about the fortress had always intrigued him. Where others saw a militaristic house, he saw possibility. And now, with the rightful claimants gone or scattered, the seat of Storm's End was the most alluring prize of all. He walked slowly through the torchlit corridors until he emerged in a courtyard below. The Red Keep's courtyard was nearly deserted at this hour. Only a few guards in Lannister colors patrolled, looking bored. A stableboy dozed against a barrel, and a kitchen maid shuffled past, holding a basket of stale bread. None of them took any notice of him, which suited him well. Littlefinger had mastered the art of blending into the background when he wished. He paused at the old well, letting his fingertips trail along its rim. Then he threw one small coin into the depths and listened for the plunk as it broke the water's surface, an idle gesture that signified nothing to anyone else, but to Peter it was a quiet ritual, paying homage to the dark depths where secrets remained hidden until summoned. His thoughts drifted to the possibility of opposition. Varys had once been a thorn in his side, but Varys was gone, vanished across the sea, or dead if rumors were to be believed. Cersei, the cunning lioness, had fallen from power in a most spectacular fashion. The remnants of her faction had fractured. Those Lannisters left in King's Landing were pliable enough, concerned more with their own survival than with an upstart from the Vale. The Tyrells were all but extinct, thanks to the wildfire explosion in the September of Baelor and subsequent betrayals. And as for the Starks, they held the North, a distant threat but not an immediate obstacle to his southern ambitions. Yet there was another name that needled him, a name he could not easily dismiss: Gendry. The boy who had once rode from King's Landing and found himself in the thick of war. The bastard who carried Robert's blood. Peter had followed Gendry's path with a sharp eye. The youth had spent time in the Brotherhood without banners, later forging alliances with the Baratheon loyalists in the Stormlands. Though he was no statesman, Gendry had inherited something more powerful than cunning. He had inherited the memory of King Robert's strength, the hammer that had shattered Rhaegar's breastplate on the trident. Common folk found such lineage more meaningful than the intricacies of court politics. Bastard or not, if Gendry somehow rallied the Stormlands behind him, Peter's carefully laid plan might unravel. He resolved to address the Gendry problem. A quiet elimination was not wise. It might provoke an outcry. But swaying the young man to his cause might be possible, if done with delicacy. After all, Gendry knew little of forging alliances. Perhaps a lordship, a formal acknowledgement of his Baratheon blood, a position as master of arms or commander of the Storm's End garrison. flattery and small concessions could go a long way in ensuring that Gendry did not block his ascendancy. Alternatively, if Gendry proved intractable, well, Littlefinger knew countless ways to dispose of obstacles. Midnight was near when Peter finally slipped through a hidden door that led to his private exit from the Red Keep. He emerged onto a narrow lane behind the castle walls, where a single hooded figure waited with 2 horses. The figure offered a curt nod, helping Peter mount. Without speaking a word, they trotted off through the winding streets of King's Landing, careful to draw little attention. The pair rode for nearly half an hour, descending into the lower reaches of the city before arriving at an unremarkable townhouse tucked between a stable and a shuttered tavern. Only the faint light from a single upper window indicated any occupancy. Littlefinger dismounted and slipped inside, the hooded figure following. Behind the townhouse's modest facade lay a labyrinth of rooms and connecting corridors. He wound his way through them until he entered a well-appointed chamber lined with tapestries. A small brazier glowed in the corner, illuminating the austere furnishings. A table with 2 chairs, a canopy bed, and a worn armchair. Someone waited in the shadows. A tall man with a shock of auburn hair tied back from a face that bore old scars. His eyes flickered with calculated wariness. "Lord Baelish," the man said. A faint accent colored his words. He was a sellsword of some repute, rumored to have been affiliated with the Golden Company before the war turned them to other tasks. Littlefinger had hired him for a very specific role. "I trust your men are in place?" Peter asked, shedding his cloak and draping it over a chair. The flicker in his eyes was a reflection of the brazier's glow or perhaps the glimmer of his own ambition. "They are. Hidden among the sellswords guarding the storms," the man confirmed. "Though I warn you, if you mean to challenge the storm landlords, you must be prepared for a siege if it comes to that." Littlefinger waved a dismissive hand. "I have no intention of a siege. Storm's End has seen too many, and the lords do not frighten me. They will see reason, or they will see my gold. Either way, I will gain their fealty. Keep your men ready to strike if any lord proves stubborn or attempts to rally behind Gendry. But be discreet." The mercenary nodded, his eyes shadowed. "You plan to openly proclaim yourself a Baratheon?" In due time, Peter said. "I have arranged to have genealogical proofs and testimonies from certain maesters. A few Stormland knights remember an obscure cousin from decades past. Once the documents are confirmed, and they will be, my bloodline will be unassailable." The sellsword's mouth curled in a smirk that was half disbelief, half reluctant admiration. "Well, then, my men stand ready." With that settled, the man departed, leaving Peter Baelish alone in the silent townhouse chamber. He sat down at the table alone with his thoughts. The final steps of his plan loomed. He imagined lords and ladies gathered in the great hall of the Red Keep, or perhaps at Storm's End itself, stunned as the heralds read out a newly discovered genealogy, exalting Peter as the rightful heir to House Baratheon's storied legacy. He imagined the ripple of shock, the instant fear, and the grudging acceptance that would spread across the realm once the crown recognized his claim. For the king, acknowledging a new Baratheon might serve as a means to restore stability to the region. Peter would, of course, swear his unyielding loyalty and generosity to the throne in exchange for official recognition. He could almost see the illusions taking shape as real as flesh and blood. Yet forging a royal line was no small thing, and Peter knew the moment he stepped forward with his claim, the entire realm would prick up its ears. The Riverlands might watch with amusement or horror depending on who was present. The Vale's lords might wonder how it would affect their liege lord. The North might not care overly much, but the Iron Islands might seek advantage in the commotion. The fractured realm could be stitched together or torn further apart, depending on how the politics played out. He stood and paced the length of the room. The tapestries caught the flicker of the brazier's flames, creating illusions of motion in the woven figures. His gaze lingered on a tapestry depicting a mighty stag leaping through a forest, chased by wolves with red eyes. Wolves for House Stark? Or simply part of an artisan's imagination? The stag's eyes were wide with terror. Peter studied the woven scene, letting the moment fill him with a curious tension. Then he turned away, as if sealing a pact with himself. Tomorrow he would set the next stage in motion. Dawn came on pale and cold, a far cry from the typical warmth of King's Landing. In a discreet carriage, Peter Baelish made his way out of the city. He wore plain clothes, nondescript enough to pass as a minor merchant or traveling clerk. His destination was an estate near Rosby, where one of the maesters he had suborned awaited him. The old man was to finalize certain documents and affix the citadel's seal. Without that seal, no claim was worth the parchment it was written on. They arrived at midday, the sun muted behind a shroud of cloud. The estate belonged to a minor lord who had fallen into heavy debt. Debt Peter had purchased. Lares, the messenger, was already there, standing guard by a modest stable. As Peter descended from the carriage, the old maester, stooped and trembling, approached. The maester's robes were clean but threadbare at the elbows, marking him as someone who had not seen the better side of the citadel in quite some time. "My lord," the maester began, offering a faint bow. He held a sheaf of parchments in one hand. "I have done as you asked. The genealogies have been aligned. The official stamps are here." His voice quavered slightly. "Very good." Peter took the parchments, scanning the lines with a clinical eye. Names, dates, marriages, births and deaths, all meticulously conjured, yet woven with enough real events to appear genuine under scrutiny. "You've been thorough." He offered a thin smile. The old man hesitated. "It cost me dearly. My reputation in the citadel. Should this ever be discovered—" "It will not be discovered," Peter said almost gently. "You have my assurances, and the coin you were promised will more than compensate you for any inconvenience." He handed the maester a small purse, heavy with gold dragons. "But remember, if any rumor of a forgery slips out from your lips," the maester bowed, understanding the threat. "I'll hold my tongue. I swear it." Peter nodded and turned away, letting Lares escort the old man back into the estate. Now that the documents bore the citadel's seal, they would withstand the scrutiny of most lords and ladies. If any maester dug deeper, Peter's pockets were deep enough, and his methods ruthless enough, to ensure the truth stayed buried. He allowed himself a moment to savor the triumph. He was on the cusp of it now. A claim to House Baratheon, a seat of power in the Stormlands, an unimaginable step upward from the tides of the Fingers where he had grown up as a minor lord of little significance. By nightfall, he was traveling back toward King's Landing, the precious parchments locked in a wooden case. His mind raced, formulating how best to unveil this grand lie. Should he appear before the king directly, or should he summon the Stormland lords to Storm's End under the pretense of offering them an advantageous alliance, only to reveal his claim in their midst? The latter seemed more dramatic, more likely to stun them into acquiescence. But he would need Storm's End under his partial control first. Its castellan was a cautious man named Ser Derek, rumored to be leaning toward Gendry if the bastard ever pressed a claim. Peter would have to handle him. Perhaps he could buy Ser Derek's loyalty outright. If that failed, well, there were subtler ways to remove an uncooperative castellan. The carriage rattled along uneven roads, each jolt reminding him of just how precarious his machinations were. Yet Peter relished the risk. For him, the game was everything, and the higher the stakes, the sweeter the victory. He recalled how he had outmaneuvered foes in the Vale, how he had wrenched power from the unsuspecting and turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. This was no different, just on a grander stage. At the Red Keep once again, he made sure to arrive in the cover of twilight. He slipped inside through a side gate, giving only a perfunctory nod to the guards. Once in his private quarters, he retrieved the wooden case and carefully set it atop a desk. Lighting a single candle, he opened the lid and ran his fingertips over the parchment seals. The black wax bore the sigil of the citadel, a ring and raven, and the official indentation of Maester Jonher's personal signet. For added authenticity, a second seal from another maester's signet had been pressed onto the main genealogy. Perfect. This was a tapestry of lies so artfully woven it might fool even the new king's hand, whomever that might be these days. He thought of Sansa Stark and how he had once woven illusions around her as well, whispering that she might be the key to reclaiming the North, forging alliances with her name. The memory brought a wry pang to his heart, for Sansa had ultimately slipped away from him. Her trust had never been fully secured, and her wits had grown sharper than he expected. But the Stormlands, he reassured himself, would not slip away so easily. The fortress could not fly from him. The lords there might balk, but coin and cunning would bring them to heel. This time he would not overreach. He would claim what was ripe for the taking and make it unassailable. Still, a flicker of concern nagged at him. Gendry, a bastard with no formal training in statesmanship but with Robert's blood and the build of a blacksmith who could swing a warhammer as if it were a child's toy. The smallfolk admired him, and some Storm Lords remained loyal to the memory of the rebellion's hero. They might rally behind Gendry out of sentiment and tradition. If word reached the Stormlands that Petyr Baelish intended to claim the Baratheon name, Gendry could be a rallying point for rebellion, especially if some romantic notion of true Baratheon blood flared up among the knights and lords. Petyr considered the idea of forging a marriage. But that notion was laughable. He was decades older, and besides, Gendry was a man. So that was out. He considered betrothing Gendry to some relative or ally he could control. The trouble was Gendry had no reason to trust him. Another approach might be to grant Gendry some courtesy title, Lord of the Storm's Hammer, or something suitably grand-sounding but without real power. But that required Gendry's consent. A small smile curled Petyr's lips as he realized that a man like Gendry might not even realize how advantageous it was to accept such a gift. Perhaps it was best to meet him face to face. That was riskier, but high risk could yield high reward. Petyr had contacts in the Stormlands, spies who whispered that Gendry was newly returned from the Riverlands, traveling with a small retinue. He was expected at Storm's End within the fortnight to stand vigil at the tomb of King Robert, a gesture that the smallfolk and some lesser lords deeply admired. If Petyr arrived there first and presented himself as a potential ally, playing the humble, helpful lord from the Vale, he might earn Gendry's trust, or at least his curiosity. Once they were on speaking terms, the boy might be swayed with promises. And if that failed, there were always more drastic measures. Night deepened and Petyr blew out the candle. He allowed the darkness to cradle him, secure in the knowledge that his plans were advancing at a steady pace. Each step was measured, each potential threat accounted for. He would not be undone by oversight or arrogance. Long ago, a boy named Petyr Baelish had lost a duel for the love of a Tully daughter. Now, a man named Littlefinger orchestrated the destinies of entire houses. The memory of that naive youth who once believed in fair fights was dead and buried, replaced by this master of illusions. The next morning, he rose early and sent word to the stables to prepare horses for a journey south. By mid-afternoon, he was on the Rose Road, traveling with a small band of trusted retainers, including Lares and 2 silent guards. They bore no obvious sigils. Petyr hoped to arrive at Storm's End inconspicuously so he might gauge the castle's climate before announcing his presence. The road was dusty, and a light breeze carried the scents of hay and wildflowers. Now and again, travelers passed them, merchants, minstrels, farmers. Few recognized Littlefinger, and those who did made sure to keep their mouths shut for fear of entangling themselves in his business. They spent the night at a quiet inn near Haystack Hall, a place of good bread and poor ale. Lares, ever vigilant, kept watch outside Petyr's chamber. The night passed uneventfully, and in the morning they continued south, passing Pottingfield and the cluster of hamlets that dotted the fields. As they neared the Stormlands, the weather turned. Clouds gathered ominously and the wind picked up. On the horizon, lightning flickered in purple-gray skies. Petyr felt a surge of exhilaration. The Stormlands were known for their tempests. It seemed a fitting backdrop for the tempest he was about to unleash. It was near dusk when they crested a rocky hill and caught sight of Storm's End in the distance. The fortress stood on the edge of a sheer cliff, its walls thick and ancient, battered by centuries of storms. Torches gleamed from the ramparts, a ruddy glow against the darkening sky. Shipbreaker Bay stretched behind it, restless waves crashing against jagged rocks. Even from miles away, Petyr sensed the power of that place, a seat of sovereignty that had defied sieges and storms alike. Soon, if all went as planned, it would belong to him. He felt a stirring of emotion, not exactly fear, not quite awe, but a thrumming sense of destiny. He had orchestrated so many events in the realm, from the death of kings to the rise of new lords, but to claim a great house's seat would be the most audacious move of his life. If he succeeded, he would stand shoulder to shoulder with the mightiest houses of Westeros, a man who had begun life with no more than a meager inheritance on the cold fingers. His party advanced down the winding road leading to Storm's End's main gate. Rain had begun to fall, first as a drizzle, then as a steady downpour. Water dripped from their cloaks, forming small puddles on the ground. The guards at the gate peered out through the gloom, and one approached, squinting at Petyr's hood. "State your name and business," the guard barked. Petyr lifted his head, allowing the torchlight to reveal his face. "I am Lord Petyr Baelish, Lord Protector of the Vale." I come seeking an audience with Ser Derek or whomever holds command in Storm's End this night. A faint shift in the guard's expression betrayed recognition. News of Petyr Baelish's cunning likely reached even these ramparts. "Aye, my lord. We will escort you." He signaled another guard and the gate grated open. Petyr's small retinue followed him into the courtyard where stable hands rushed forward to take their horses and more guards flanked them on both sides. The heavy stone keep within the walls loomed like a challenge, its face devoid of ornament. Storm's End needed no frills to proclaim its power. Lightning split the sky as they crossed the courtyard, thunder shaking the ground beneath their feet. Petyr marveled at how such a place retained its defiance against nature's fury. If he could harness that defiance for himself, shape it to his own ends, he could become nearly untouchable. Within the main hall, a steward came forward and bowed stiffly. "Lord Baelish, welcome to Storm's End. Ser Derek awaits you in the round hall. Please, follow me." They followed him through wide corridors whose walls were adorned with ancient shields and faded banners, relics of battles long past. The round hall earned its name from the massive circular chamber at its core, open to the floors above, each level ringed with a stone balustrade. 2 great hearths blazed, filling the space with warmth and the pungent scent of burning oak. Ser Derek stood near one of these hearths, clad in plain steel and a heavy cloak. His features were weathered, his hair streaked with gray at the temples, and he carried himself with the bearing of a man long accustomed to command. He nodded in greeting. "Lord Baelish, I did not expect you." "Ser Derek." Petyr's voice was smooth, measured. He let a pleasant smile form on his lips. "My apologies for arriving unannounced, but I thought it prudent to come in person. I've been hearing troubling rumors of unrest in the Stormlands. I have a fondness for this region. My mother was of the Griffin's Roost branch, you see, and I thought to see if I could lend assistance." Derek's expression remained cautious. "A kind offer, my lord, but the Stormlands have weathered worse storms. We stand as we always have." Petyr let the moment breathe. The crackle of the hearth and the distant rumble of thunder provided a fitting soundtrack to their exchange. "I understand Gendry, the late King Robert's natural son, is also expected here soon to stand vigil at his father's tomb." The flicker in Ser Derek's eyes betrayed that the mention of Gendry mattered. "Aye, the lad's on his way. The Stormlords are none too sure what to make of him, but many hold Robert's memory in high esteem." "That memory is powerful," Petyr conceded. "The war of the usurper, the defeat of the Targaryens, Robert's subsequent reign, these shaped the realm. A man carrying that blood might inspire loyalty, if he can prove himself worthy." Derek crossed his arms over his broad chest. "He is a good lad, honest and strong. Whether that's enough, time will tell." Petyr nodded sympathetically. "I admire honesty, though it can be a dangerous trait in a place like this. But I come neither to speak ill of Gendry nor to meddle in your affairs. I only wish to remind you that the Vale stands ready to ally with the Stormlands, an alliance that could offer stability in these troubled times." Derek frowned. "You speak of alliances, but I have heard rumors, my lord, rumors that you hold a deeper interest in the Stormlands. There are those who whisper you intend to claim the Baratheon name for yourself." Petyr affected a look of mild surprise. "Rumors? One hears so many. I would not put stock in idle gossip, Ser Derek. Let the seed of doubt remain. For now, it was best if the rumor lingered in the air without confirmation. I do have old ties to certain branches of the Stormland families, but I claim no seat that does not rightfully belong to me." He could sense the tension in the air. Derek was no fool. The man had likely heard multiple accounts of Petyr's cunning. Yet for now, the Castellan held his tongue. He gestured to one of the high-backed chairs near the hearth. "You must be weary from travel. Will you take supper with me?" "Gladly," Petyr said. "I would welcome the chance to learn more of the castle's situation." As they settled at a long table on a raised dais, servants brought forth steaming trenchers of stew, dark bread, and flagons of ale. Petyr nibbled politely, praising the food in soft tones while his mind evaluated every glance, every subtle inflection in Derek's voice. Over supper, they discussed the unseasonable storms, the repairs to certain battlements, and the morale of the garrison. Petyr made sure to seem genuinely interested, occasionally hinting at how the Vale's support, financial or military, could help stabilize the region. When at last the plates were cleared, Peter stood prepared to retire to the guest chambers offered him. Ser Derek, I look forward to speaking more. Perhaps you'll join me for breakfast to continue our conversation? Derek nodded. I'll be there, my lord. Peter's men were quartered in a small wing off the central keep, and as Peter entered his chamber, Lares hovered close, shutting the door behind them. The chamber was sparse but comfortable enough, a sturdy bed, a table with a wash basin, a single window overlooking the courtyard. My lord, Lares whispered. Some of the men in the yard spoke Gendry's name. Word is he'll arrive within 2 days. He's bringing a handful of knights and a small retinue, but rumor has it that many local lords plan to be here to greet him. Peter shrugged off his cloak, draping it over a chair. That is expected. We will observe them carefully. As soon as Gendry arrives, I intend to make myself known, but only in a way that suggests I'm an ally. Meanwhile, we must gauge which lords are the best targets for persuasion or bribery. Lares nodded, slipping a small sheaf of notes from inside his tunic. I've compiled a preliminary list. The Lady Wild is said to be in debt, the Lord Karen is rumored to have a mistress in King's Landing who's expensive to keep, and the Lesser Knight Errol is well known for his gambling habit. We can find weaknesses. Excellent, Peter said, skimming the names. The Stormlands might pride themselves on honor, but every lord had cracks in their armor. We'll speak with them discreetly, one by one. Outside, thunder rolled again, shaking the ancient walls. Peter felt a surge of anticipation. Storm's End stood as a fortress against the raging elements, but inside these thick stone walls, men's hearts could be swayed, fooled, or corrupted. He was a master at reading those hearts and playing them like a well-tuned harp. Over the next few days, he would sow disquiet among those who might stand against him and offer salvation to those who pledged their loyalty. He dismissed Lares and set about reviewing the forged genealogies in the faint candlelight. Every name, every date was in place. When the time came, he would present them, perhaps first to the lords he bribed to garner their endorsement, and then to the king or a regional council. He had not yet decided, but the path was set. As the wind howled in the night, Peter felt almost at home. The storms reminded him of the battered coast of the Fingers, where the sea crashed relentlessly, shaping the cliffs into jagged silhouettes. He had grown up with the knowledge that nature could wear down even the mightiest stone. Men were no different. Push them enough and they would crumble. His father's keep had been small, perched precariously on a rocky promontory, and Peter had known want, had known insignificance. But he had also learned that cunning and ambition could achieve what birthright alone could not. He lay down on the bed, letting the storms outside lull him toward a fitful sleep. For a moment, he closed his eyes and imagined a different life in which he was content with small things. That life had been shattered when his childish love for Catelyn Tully was denied him, and the steel of the dagger that nearly killed him in a duel had left a scar on his soul. No, he could never go back to being that naive boy. He had chosen this path, and it led toward the seat of Storm's End, a seat from which he would reshape the politics of Westeros. Dawn broke with the smell of damp stone in the air, the storm abating to a miserable drizzle. Peter rose, donned his finest doublet, dark velvet that hinted at wealth without flaunting it, and ventured forth to greet Ser Derek at the breakfast table. As they broke their fast, Peter steered the conversation delicately toward matters of loyalty and alliances. He alluded to the Vale's resources, the men he commanded, and the gold he controlled. He spoke of how the Vale, once roused, could be a formidable ally. Derek listened politely, his face a mask. Eventually, Peter leaned in, lowering his voice. Ser Derek, we both know that the Stormlands lack a strong leadership at present. Gendry is untested, a bastard. Even if he is King Robert's son, he may not have the wits to protect the region from larger threats. The Ironborn raid the coasts, remnants of Lannister loyalists lurk in the shadows, and the crown is fragile. Someone must ensure stability. That someone, I believe, could be me. Derek's gaze hardened. So you do mean to press a claim? Peter offered a humble tilt of his head. I mean to offer an option. Let us say my lineage might be traced to Baratheon blood. If that were so, then I would have a rightful claim to Storm's End, a far more stable one than Gendry's. Yet, I do not wish to press it forcefully. I would rather the lords of the Stormlands see the wisdom of it themselves. Thunder boomed in the distance, though the storm outside had quieted to a weary drizzle. Derek pushed his plate aside, his eyes never leaving Peter. And what would become of Gendry if he refused to recognize your claim? A faint shrug. I do not believe conflict is necessary. Perhaps Gendry can be appeased with lands or titles that do not threaten the authority of Storm's End. Or if he wishes to remain within the castle, a position could be created for him, master-at-arms, perhaps, or something befitting the son of a king. Peter paused. But if he insists on challenging a rightful claim, then the outcome rests on his own actions. Derek inhaled slowly, clasping his hands on the table. The men of the Stormlands do not bend easily. They followed Robert because he was strong, charismatic. Gendry has some of that same raw energy. The small folk love him, or so they say. The older knights see him as a living reminder of the rebellion. They may not accept your claim without proof so ironclad that even the Citadel cannot refute it. Peter's eyes glinted. Proof can be provided. In fact, it is already prepared. Once I share it with the realm, there will be no doubt of my lineage. He leaned in a fraction. But you could help me by encouraging the knights, the servants, even the local small folk to see reason. I have gold to repair the keep, gold to improve the farmlands, gold to raise wages for the garrison. I can be most generous to those who support me. Derek did not answer at once. His stare was implacable, and Peter wondered if the man would yield. Finally, the Castellan spoke, his words carefully measured. Very well, Lord Baelish. Let me see these proofs when you are ready to share them. Then I will decide where I stand. I will not lie to my people, but if your papers convince me, if your purse can aid this land, I might be inclined to support you. If not, Peter nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. Thank you, Ser Derek. I value your honesty. They rose, and Peter took his leave, a guarded sense of satisfaction growing within him. This was progress. Derek was not a man easily swayed, but neither was he a fanatic. He wanted what was best for Storm's End, and if Peter could present a convincing claim and tangible benefits, Derek might side with him over a green youth. It was precisely the opening Peter needed. The day dragged on in small, subtle maneuvers. Peter arranged private conversations with a handful of knights, sowing seeds of doubt about Gendry's readiness and praising the virtues of stable leadership. He dropped hints that his coffers could alleviate personal debts or provide opportunities for advancement. He attended a brief meeting with local merchants, extolling the virtues of trade between the Vale and the Stormlands if the region had a lord who understood commerce. Quietly, coins changed hands and new friendships were made. By the time the sun set behind the storm-lashed horizon, Peter felt the pulse of Storm's End shift subtly in his favor. Not openly, of course, but beneath the surface. Whispers carried weight in hallways, in the armory, in the servants' quarters. Talk of a new Baratheon claimant was titillating, scandalous even, but also alluring. Some scoffed at the idea, but others, those who had felt neglected by absent leadership, were intrigued. And so, as the keep settled into the hush of another rainy night, Peter Baelish retired to his chamber, the forged parchments laid out on the wooden table. He imagined the moment he would break their seals and present them before lords and knights. He imagined the hush that would fall over the round hall as the words were read, as the heraldic line of names, real and invented, resounded against these ancient stones. He imagined the doubt, the disbelief, then the creeping certainty as he produced witness after witness, seal after seal. He could see it already, a new era for the Stormlands, with himself at its helm, forging alliances and manipulating the realm from yet another seat of power. And in those quiet corners of his mind, he wondered if, in time, even the Iron Throne might bow to him. A man could dream, and a man like Peter Baelish could make that dream a reality, one careful step at a time. By midday the following day, the storm clouds had scattered, leaving only ragged wisps across a pale sky. The courtyard of Storm's End glistened from the recent rain, and the wind carried the tang of brine from Shipbreaker Bay. Servants bustled about, sweeping away puddles that had gathered between ancient flagstones, while the garrison's guards changed shifts, stamping their boots to shake off the lingering damp. Amid the commotion, Peter Baelish strolled leisurely, hands clasped behind his back, appearing as if he had not a care in the world. In truth, he was carefully observing how the castle stirred, as if waking to a new awareness. Whispers of Lord Baelish traveled among the knights and servants, rumors that he had come bearing a powerful claim. He returned polite nods, offered bland smiles, sometimes stopping to compliment the architecture of Storm's End or inquire about the well-being of some retainer's family. The right word or gesture at the right time could bloom into loyalty. He found Ser Derek near the armory, overseeing a sparring session for the younger men of the garrison. Blunted swords clanged in a quick rhythm, accompanied by grunts of effort. Derek cast the occasional correction, stance, footwork, guard position. Though his back was turned when Peter approached, he must have sensed the newcomer, for he dismissed the sparring knights with a wave. They trotted away, leaving the two men with only the hiss of the wind around them. "Lord Baelish," Derek said, turning, "you are up early for a courtier." Early hours offer the clearest thoughts, Peter replied, smiling easily. Ser Derek, I hear Gendry is expected by dusk. Some say he'll be accompanied by more visitors than we anticipated. Lords and knights from across the Stormlands, eager to see if he is, indeed, Robert's worthy son. Derek inclined his head. That is so. There's talk of Lord Buckler, Ser Celtigar from across the bay, here at the invitation of a Stormland cousin, and possibly representatives from Tarth as well. They come out of respect for King Robert's memory and out of curiosity. The bastard of Flea Bottom made a name for himself, traveling with the Brotherhood without banners and later helping in the wars that followed. It seems folk want to see the truth of him with their own eyes. A pause lingered, both men measuring one another. Peter feigned a distant interest. I wonder if Gendry himself expects so much attention. I recall that he never sought fame. He was thrust into it by circumstance. The question is how he'll wield it now. Derek's stare was level. A question best answered soon. We have space for all the visiting lords, but be warned. A gathering of proud Stormlanders is rarely a gentle affair, especially when talk of inheritance hangs in the air. Peter offered a congenial laugh. I would not expect gentleness from the Stormlands, no. If I may, Ser Derek, a piece of advice. Keep the stewards watchful. The toasts tonight could grow spirited. I would hate for any guest to cause trouble after too many cups of ale. Derek grunted. I'll see to it. With that, Peter bowed and wandered off through the courtyard, inwardly pleased. The greater the crowd, the brighter the spotlight, and that suited him perfectly. Better to unveil his fabricated claim in front of as many Stormland lords as possible. Public surprise often led to confusion, and confusion could be turned into capitulation with deft manipulation. Few men stood firm against a claim bolstered by the Citadel's seals. Even fewer stood firm once the glint of gold sweetened the air. He made his way to the great hall where the servants were arranging benches and tables in preparation for the arrivals. The hall stretched in a half-circle beneath a vaulted ceiling, the thick walls of Storm's End holding back the furious sea winds. At the far side, elevated on a dais, stood the seat that had long belonged to the lords of Baratheon. A sturdy oaken chair, carved with a faint likeness of a stag's head, it symbolized centuries of unbroken power until the line broke with the deaths of Robert, Renly, and Stannis. That seat, if all went according to plan, would soon be his. He lingered a moment, gazing upon it with a pensive air, then turned briskly to ascend the stairs. In his guest chamber, Larys awaited him, perched by the window. At Peter's entrance, the youth stood and bowed slightly. My lord, Larys murmured, I've spoken with some of the knights in their quarters. There's a spread of opinions. Some talk about Gendry's rightful blood, others worry that a bastard is still a bastard no matter if he's the son of a king. They're curious about your presence here. At least 3 knights have admitted they'd be open to new leadership if there's proof and if there's enough coin. Only 3 so far? Peter teased with a smirk. We'll see that number grow. Larys nodded, pushing back a strand of hair that had slipped loose from its binding. As for the merchants you met yesterday, they're quite amenable to your promises of better trade routes between the Vale and the Stormlands. They like the talk of new roads, lowered tariffs, and funding for port expansions along Shipbreaker Bay. Indeed, Peter said softly, one of the best ways to influence a region is through its trade. Hungry men can forget a questionable bloodline if their purses grow heavy. He glanced toward the wooden chest that held the forged parchments. When Gendry arrives, there will be ceremony and courtesy. We must be patient until the right moment. Meanwhile, see that Ser Derek's cup does not go empty tonight and that he notices who fills it. A well-timed word in his ear might tip the balance if he wavers. Yes, my lord. Peter picked up the chest, carefully unlocked it, and leafed through the documents once more. His eyes glided over each line, verifying the precision. The imaginary cousin from 3 generations ago. The subtle references to a marriage record stored in the Vale's archives. A mention of a lady-in-waiting from House Baratheon who supposedly had borne children in secret. Each detail had been carefully aligned so as not to contradict existing records. The Citadel seals were crisp against the parchment, the black wax bearing the imprint of authenticity. A near-flawless piece of historical fiction. He closed the chest, locked it again. Good, he murmured to himself. All is in place. Afternoon brought more arrivals to Storm's End. The portcullis groaned open as small processions trickled in, a column of riders from House Wild, a decorated carriage flying the green and brown banner of House Errol, a knot of lesser knights from the coastal keeps. Each was greeted by the castle's stewards and shown to lodging appropriate to their station. Peter did not rush to greet them, but he watched from a hidden balcony above the courtyard, noting who clasped hands with whom, which retinue seemed largest, and who wore expressions of worry or excitement. These observations were like threads he would weave into his next move. The sun dipped low on the horizon, staining the sea in fiery hues when horns announced another arrival. The banners here were fewer, simpler, no great sigils of ancient houses, but rather a single banner depicting a crowned stag's head upon a field of black. That standard, Peter knew, was Robert's personal sigil. Though Gendry was a bastard, someone had stitched that banner to honor the legacy, perhaps as a tribute. Peter leaned forward from the balcony railing, heart quickening as the visitors rode into the courtyard. Gendry rode at the head on a massive warhorse, black as night. His dark hair was short, his jaw set firm. Even across the distance, Peter noticed he carried himself with a straightforward confidence, entirely at odds with the sly cunning of the typical courtly lord. Gendry looked like Robert come again, broad in the shoulders, muscular arms visible beneath the rolled sleeves of a plain leather jerkin. Flanking him were half a dozen knights, including 2 older men who bore the sigils of lesser Stormland houses. Several more men-at-arms followed, all wearing serviceable armor rather than showy parade gear. Guards rushed forward to take the reins. Gendry dismounted, his hammer slung across his back, an unmistakable echo of his father's favored weapon during the rebellion. He exchanged greetings with Ser Derek, who strode out to welcome him, clasping Gendry's forearm in a warrior's handshake. Peter could not hear their words, but he caught the nods of mutual respect. Then Gendry turned, gazing up at the ramparts and towers of Storm's End, a flicker of boyish wonder in his eyes. He must have visited once before, rumor said he had, escorted by Davos Seaworth for a short time, but this was clearly a proud moment, returning as the possible heir. Applause rose from some onlookers in the courtyard. Gendry, embarrassed by the attention, only nodded curtly. A pang of curiosity tugged at Peter. Even he had to admit that Gendry had Robert's coloring, that mix of black hair and blue eyes, the same aura of raw strength. But did he have Robert's easy charm that could sway lords and small folk alike? Or was he too straightforward, too earnest for the labyrinth of politics? Peter hoped the latter. It made manipulation so much simpler. He waited until Gendry and his companions were led inside. In the great hall, the bustle of reunion and welcome murmurs filled the air. Peter joined the throng discreetly, noting how Gendry tried to greet each lord by name, a faint smile on his face. Standing near the dais was Ser Derek, adopting a position by the old Baratheon seat. Derek's voice carried over the hall. "Welcome, Gendry of the Stormlands, son of the late King Robert Baratheon. We gather tonight to honor King Robert's memory and to share in the hospitality of Storm's End. Let all who come in peace find shelter here from the storms." A spate of applause followed. Gendry, looking faintly uncomfortable, bowed his head. "Thank you, Ser Derek, and thanks to all who've come. I hope I can do right by my father, rest his soul. I'm still learning the ways of lords and knights, so be patient with me." Peter read the crowd. Some looked on with sympathy, others with skepticism. A few cheered as if seeing a hero returned to his rightful place. By the dais, Ser Derek gestured to the seat behind him. An unspoken symbol, perhaps, that Gendry might one day occupy it. Peter watched it all unfold without revealing the slightest flicker of emotion. He took a place along one of the side tables, half shrouded in the crowd, listening intently. Soon, servants arrived carrying trays of roasted meats, trenchers of thick stew, loaves of fresh bread, and wheels of sharp cheese. Flagons of ale and dark wine made their rounds. The great hall resounded with conversation and laughter, the tension easing as folk settled in for a communal meal. Peter held back on drink, taking only small sips. He had no intention of dulling his wits tonight. Eventually, Ser Derek prompted Gendry to speak with various lords. Peter observed how Gendry greeted them awkwardly, lacking the smooth courtesy of one born to such circles. Still, there was an earnestness about him that some older knights seemed to appreciate. Peter's lips curved in a faint smile. Naive earnestness was easy to exploit. When at last Gendry made his way around the hall and caught sight of Peter, he blinked in apparent recognition. He hesitated for a moment, as though uncertain whether he was supposed to greet this particular guest. Then, with a polite inclination of his head, Gendry approached. My lord, Gendry began, voice low. I know you. From King's Landing years ago. You're Peter Baelish, yes? I served as an armorer's apprentice when I was younger. I saw you once or twice about the city. Heard your name often enough. Peter, ever gracious, rose from his seat and offered a deferential nod. You do me honor by recalling Gendry. And please call me Peter if you wish. I am no king, merely a traveling lord from the Vale. He motioned for Gendry to sit beside him on the bench. How fares your journey? Gendry sat, setting his warhammer carefully at his feet. Long but good. I was in the Riverlands for a time, helping to rebuild after the wars. Then I got word that the lords of the Stormlands wanted me here. Something about upholding my father's name. Peter studied him, letting a moment pass. You must know that many Storm Lords yearn for a Baratheon in Storm's End. Your father, for all his faults, had the love of his people. They see his reflection in you. Gendry looked down at his calloused hands. I never even knew him, not really. I was a bastard in Flea Bottom, but I suppose if it helps keep peace around here, I'll do what I can. There was no trace of guile in his tone, only a stubborn sincerity that Peter found oddly refreshing and childlike. Such a responsibility, Peter said gently, but one you do not have to shoulder alone. The lords here can guide you. Or I can if you'll let me. Gendry's brow furrowed. You'd help me? Why? Because I respect the Baratheon legacy, Peter replied smoothly. You'll find many in the realm who'd sooner ignore or undermine you. But let us say I've always admired King Robert's strength and the Stormlands' resilience. And I'd like to ensure the region prospers. He placed a light hand on Gendry's forearm, a gesture of camaraderie. A strong Stormlands helps keep peace across the 7 kingdoms. Gendry's eyes searched Peter's face as though trying to spot hidden motives. I don't know much about politics, but I know men rarely do anything out of pure kindness. I won't stand in anyone's way if they have a better claim, so long as they treat the people here fairly. But I made a promise to Ser Davos. He told me to look after these lands if I could. Peter's heart pulsed faster. Gendry was practically serving him the perfect opening. A wise knight, Ser Davos. He inclined his head. I understand your caution. We can speak more, but for now enjoy the feast. You've earned the hospitality of Storm's End. He stood, offering Gendry a parting nod. The young man seemed torn between hope and suspicion, so Peter stepped away, allowing him to mingle with others. Seeds planted, Peter thought. Let Gendry stew in the notion that maybe Peter was a would-be ally with no designs on Storm's End. No sense tipping his hand just yet. As the feast wore on, Peter noticed a handful of Stormland lords eyeing Gendry with a mix of scorn and curiosity. Lord Buckler, with his lined face and silvered hair, muttered frequently to his neighbor. Another, Lord Caron, seemed more open, raising his cup in Gendry's direction from time to time. There was a current of tension in the hall, swirling beneath the surface festivities. Yet Gendry either did not sense it or chose to ignore it. He was laughing with 2 knights who had once ridden under Robert's banner. They swapped stories of the Blackwater Rush and the Battle of the Bells, teasing Gendry about how he would have fared if he'd fought beside his father. At length, Peter noticed Ser Derek beckoning him from near the dais. He wove through the crowd to meet the Castellan, who stood beneath a banner depicting the crowned stag. It seems the men are eager for Gendry to speak, Derek said quietly, scanning the crowd. They want to hear if he intends to lay a formal claim to the title Lord of Storm's End. I've told him he should at least say something about it, but the lad seems reluctant. Peter glanced at Gendry, who was now accepting a freshly poured flagon from a servant. Well, that's the question, is it not? Will they see him as a rightful Baratheon, or just a well-meaning bastard? Which side do you take? Derek asked, eyes narrowing. Will you support him, or press your own claim? The subtle edge in Derek's voice hinted that the moment of decision was nearing. Peter offered a gentle smile. I remain neutral until the time for neutrality passes. Let Gendry speak. If the Storm Lords cheer him as the new Lord of Storm's End, well, I might stand aside. But if they doubt him, if they clamor for a more legitimate bloodline, then I would feel obliged to provide them with an alternative. Derek's expression tightened. So it's true, then? You have evidence of your own Baratheon blood? Peter inclined his head. I do, but I will not present it unless there is a clear need. Conflict helps no one. If Gendry is embraced wholeheartedly, I won't tear the Stormlands apart by forcing a rivalry. I only wish to ensure that Storm's End has the strongest possible leadership. Honor that, and you'll see I mean no harm. Derek's gaze flicked from Peter to Gendry. At last, he nodded curtly. Very well. I'll let the men have their say. Just know this, if Gendry tries and fails, if they reject him, you'd best make your claim quickly before Storm's End plunges into disarray. Peter bowed slightly. I appreciate your counsel. He drifted away, taking up a position near the middle of the hall. The time was nearly ripe, he could sense it. A hush rippled through the crowd as Gendry finished his current conversation. One of the older knights clapped him on the shoulder and said something encouraging. Another lord lifted a cup and called for quiet, urging the room to let the bastard of Robert speak. Slowly, conversation died. Gendry found himself standing alone in a pool of lamplight. His face flushed under so many watchful eyes. Peter saw the flicker of nerves in Gendry's posture, hands flexing by his sides, chest rising with a deep breath. Gendry cleared his throat. I'm not good with fancy words. But I'm here because some of you believe I might do honor to my father's name. I don't know much about ruling. But I do know that Storm's End is a place of pride, a place that stood against everything from Targaryen dragons to the fiercest storms. King Robert was a hero once. Maybe I can't fill his boots, but I can do my best to protect this castle and these lands. A few murmurs of approval sounded, but not as many as Peter had anticipated. Too many faces in the crowd remained stony, waiting for more. Gendry continued, his tone earnest. What I can promise is my strength, what skill at arms I have, and my willingness to listen to those who know more than me. If the Stormlords see fit to let me take up the title as Lord of Storm's End, I'll swear to defend these lands with my life. He paused, uncertain, then added, and if you decide I'm not the one, then I'll still fight for the Stormland's sake, because it's my home. That's all I've got to say, really. Silence claimed the hall. The tension was palpable. Several lords exchanged glances, shifting uneasily. Peter read the room. Some appreciated Gendry's honesty. Others might scoff at his ignorance. A single question hung in the air. Does a bastard's earnestness outweigh the significance of bloodline and proven leadership? It was Ser Derek who broke the hush. Your words do you credit, he said, stepping forward. But the lords gathered here must decide whether your father's blood is enough to seat you in Storm's End. For generations, House Baratheon has ruled, blood of Orys Baratheon, half-brother to the Targaryen conqueror, it said, running strong in their veins. Now that line stands broken, or so we believed. He looked around, catching the eyes of various lords. Is there any among you who would dispute Gendry's right to succeed where no other Baratheon heir remains? A murmur spread. Lord Buckler coughed loudly, stepping forward in a swirl of his rich green cloak. Bastard or not, the boy has King Robert's blood. We all know it. Yet is that enough for us to bend the knee, ignoring law and tradition? My father's father taught me that the lords of the Stormlands have always followed the rightful line, not just the strongest arm. Lord Caron interjected. But the Stormlands also followed Robert when he rebelled against King Aerys. And Robert was no milksop with a perfect pedigree. He was a man of action. Sometimes a strong arm is exactly what's needed. Buckler scoffed. We have no proof Gendry has the wits or the lineage to hold Storm's End. Gendry's jaw tightened. He looked ready to speak, but Ser Derek silenced him with a raised hand. We must all speak freely. The Stormlands have had enough secrets. Let doubts be voiced. Who else doubts the boy? A middle-aged knight in battered plates stepped forward. I served King Robert at the Battle of the Trident. He was unstoppable. But this lad is untested. I'd follow him if he can show he's half the man Robert was. But if not, the knight trailed off, shrugging. The hum of voices rose, some in Gendry's favor, others hesitant. Peter felt a thrill run through him like a spark lighting tinder. This was the moment he had waited for, the moment when dissatisfaction hovered, begging for a solution. He caught Ser Derek's eye from across the hall, and the castellan subtly nodded, acknowledging the unspoken invitation. Derek raised his hand again, silencing the crowd. It seems the lords are not entirely convinced. Gendry, do you have any further claims to press? Or is there another who might have Baratheon blood to lay claim to Storm's End? Gendry frowned, confusion evident. Another? I don't know of any. Robert had brothers, but they're all dead far as I know. The hush in the room grew expectant. Eyes flicked from Gendry to each other, searching for a sign. Peter felt the tension coil around his heart, exhilarating. Now was the time. He placed a hand inside his tunic and stepped forward into the open space between the dais and the crowd, his expression composed, almost sorrowful. As it happens, Peter said softly, and all heads swiveled toward him, there may be another branch of the Baratheon line. One thought lost or overlooked. He paused, letting the magnitude of that statement sink in. Gasps and murmurs rose, a flurry of speculation. Gendry's eyes narrowed in puzzlement, and Ser Derek, standing behind him, watched Peter with guarded intensity. "Lord Baelish," Gendry said, half a question, half a challenge. Peter drew a measured breath. "I came to Storm's End not merely by curiosity, but by necessity. I have come across certain documents, long-buried genealogical records, that point to a lineage connecting the Vale and the Stormlands. That lineage, if proven, would place me as the last living scion of a distant branch of House Baratheon." The hall erupted. Voices clashed like swords, each man turning to his neighbor, trying to decide if this was madness or miracle. Some sounded incredulous, others outraged. Gendry stared at Peter in disbelief. You say you're a Baratheon?" he demanded, voice rising to be heard over the din. Peter held up his hands for silence. "I say that I have proof of Baratheon blood in my line. A lesser branch, to be sure, one lost for decades. My mother's family, obscure though they were, apparently tied back to the Stormlands. I would not have believed it myself had I not seen the documents confirmed and sealed by the Citadel." Thunderous murmurs swept the hall. Derek stepped forward, raising his voice to cut through the uproar. "My lords, quiet. Let Lord Baelish show these documents if he has them." Peter inclined his head, beckoning for Larys. The young retainer brought forth the wooden chest, unlocked it, and handed Peter the precious parchments. Their official seals gleamed in the torchlight. Peter held them gently, like holy scripture. "These are the genealogical proofs." He passed one scroll to Derek. "Sir, if you would read aloud the relevant passages so that all may hear." Derek's mouth tightened. He broke the seal and unrolled the parchment, scanning quickly. At intervals, his eyes flicked to Peter, suspicion clear, but he found nothing overtly amiss in the official form. Slowly, he began to read. "By authority of the Citadel and its attending maesters, let it be known that Peter Baelish, Lord Protector of the Vale, descends in direct female lineage from Marina Baratheon, sister to..." He paused, glancing at Peter questioningly. Before continuing, "Aemon Baratheon, second cousin to Ormond Baratheon of Storm's End, father of Steffan, father of Robert, Stannis, and Renly. Further records indicate," and so on. He trailed off, scanning line after line detailing births and marriages, all given weight by the Citadel's black wax seals. Though Peter could see the flicker of doubt in Derek's eyes, the Castellan read the words without contradiction. From the vantage of the crowd, the swirl of names and the presence of official seals were enough to impress. Lord Buckler stepped closer, peering at the parchment. "Show me that seal." Derek held it out. Buckler examined it, pressing his thumb against the wax. "It looks real enough," he grudgingly admitted. A rush of voices followed. "A hidden branch? That's impossible. The Citadel wouldn't seal forgeries, would they? Could this Baelish truly be of Baratheon blood?" Gendry looked stunned, searching Peter's face as though trying to detect any lie. "But you were Lord of the Fingers," he said, voice low. "And Master of Coin. We never heard about any Baratheon ties before." Peter dipped his head, letting his expression show just the right amount of humility. "Because I never knew myself, Gendry. My mother died when I was young. My father's line in the Vale was always considered the main branch of my heritage. Only recently did I find a trunk of letters that hinted at a Stormland ancestry. I had no reason to suspect it was so significant until the maesters verified it." The hall roiled. Some lords conferred with each other, uncertain how to respond. Gendry's fists clenched as he tried to process this challenge. Ser Derek cleared his throat. "Let us have calm. Lord Baelish has presented documents with the Citadel's seal, a genealogical link to House Baratheon. If this is authentic, it would give him a stronger legal claim than Gendry, who remains, under law, a bastard unless legitimized by royal decree. But this is madness," Gendry muttered. This is Robert's seat. He's my father." Buckler, who had been one of the loudest skeptics, stepped in. "And yet you have no royal decree, lad. Robert never named you legitimate. The Targaryen kings had ways of legitimizing bastards in the past, but no one did that for you." He turned to Peter. "Baelish, if you are indeed some cousin thrice removed, you're still a legitimate branch as opposed to Gendry's baseborn blood." A hush fell as Gendry's face darkened, eyes shining with a mixture of fury and hurt. Peter could practically feel the young man's turmoil. If Gendry had learned anything of the harshness of noble law, he would know that no matter how beloved a bastard might be, inheritance remained a delicate matter. Ser Derek spread his hands, appealing to the crowd. "We are confronted with two possible claimants to House Baratheon's seat. One has the unmistakable blood of Robert Baratheon, but no legal name. The other claims a lesser-known branch, but with full legitimacy if these documents hold. Storm's End cannot have two lords. We must decide who best carries on the true legacy of House Baratheon. Peter let the tension build, then inclined his head, addressing the hall. I have no desire to undermine Gendry's place as King Robert's son. Far from it. If he wishes, we can work together. He can serve as my castellan or champion, well rewarded for the loyalty he shows this castle. I would gladly keep him close so that Robert's own blood need never be banished from his ancestral seat. The proposition sent a fresh ripple of excitement and alarm through the hall. Some lords, clearly intrigued by the possibility of an alliance between Peter and Gendry, murmured that it might be the easiest solution. But Gendry looked thunderstruck, as if Peter had just offered him scraps from the table. "You'd let me serve as your underling?" he repeated, tone acid. "When I'm the one who has Robert's blood in my veins." Peter held his gaze evenly. "Blood, yes, but the law is the law. Storm's End is more than a name on a keep. It is a seat recognized by the crown and the realm's traditions. Without royal legitimation, your claim can be contested, and here it is. I offer a solution that could benefit everyone. The Stormlands remain stable, and you stand at my side, a living tribute to your father." Gendry stepped forward, fists clenched, as if he might strike Peter. Tension crackled in the air. Two of Gendry's knights placed hands on his shoulders, cautioning him. Peter's expression remained serene, though inside he braced himself in case the young man lashed out physically. But Gendry controlled himself, his voice raw when he finally spoke. "You talk of law, but my father won his crown by rebellion, not by inheritance. He fought for what he believed was right. Maybe I don't have the gold or the cunning you do, but I won't just roll over. I'll challenge your claim the way my father would have." A murmur of excitement swept the hall at those words. A challenge? Combat was never far from the hearts of Stormlanders. Peter felt a spark of apprehension. He had hoped Gendry's sense of reason would overcome his temper. A formal trial by combat would be messy, uncertain. Peter was no swordsman, and if Gendry demanded it, Peter would have to find a champion or risk certain defeat. Lord Buckler barked a laugh. "A trial by combat, is that what you propose? Let the gods decide who should rule Storm's End." Gendry's jaw tightened. If this man is claiming to be the rightful Baratheon, let him prove he's worthy to carry that stag banner. Let him fight for it, or name a champion who can. Peter paused, letting out a soft, thoughtful exhale, as if deeply reluctant. "Gendry, must we truly spill blood in this hall? Storm's End has seen enough war. I've offered you a compromise, one that would keep you here, keep the memory of Robert alive. Why resort to violence?" But Gendry stood resolute. "Because that's how my father would have settled it. You claim the name, but do you have the courage and strength it takes to wear it?" A wave of cheers and rowdy exclamations tore through the crowd, fueled by ale and the Stormlands' warlike traditions. Ser Derek and several others tried to restore order, but the great hall pulsed with excitement now, that primal lust for a contest. The prospect of a trial by combat to decide Storm's End's future was too dramatic to pass up. Inwardly, Peter cursed. He was a man of shadows and schemes, not steel. Yet this turn of events might still be twisted to his advantage if he found the right champion. Already, he could see knights eager to volunteer for the honor of championing a new Baratheon lord, if the price was right. And championing Peter might appeal to those with debts or ambitions. Gendry himself was a formidable fighter, no doubt stronger than most. But the Stormlands boasted many knights of skill. Peter only needed one who could match or exceed Gendry in combat. Before Peter could respond, an imposing figure stepped forth from the crowd. The scarred Sellsword captain whom Peter had hired in King's Landing, Ralston Pike, tall and sinewy, his auburn hair braided back from a weathered face. He bowed theatrically. "If Lord Baelish wishes it, I'd serve as his sword. I have some skill in single combat." Gendry eyed the man, likely recognizing a Sellsword's confidence. The tension hung taut as a bowstring. Peter, mindful of appearances, laid a hand on Ralston's shoulder. "I appreciate your courage, but let me think carefully before I consent to bloodshed." He had to act reluctant, as if a moral burden weighed upon him, even as he recognized that Ralston might indeed be the best choice if it came to swords. The man was rumored to have bested some of the Golden Company's finest. Ser Derek ascended the dais and turned to the hall. "Lords, knights, good men, calm yourselves. We cannot decide the fate of Storm's End in a drunken brawl. If a trial by combat is truly the will of both claimants, it must be declared and witnessed properly with time for each to prepare. But first, are there any who would counsel a more peaceful resolution? Is there truly no chance at a compromise?" He looked between Gendry and Peter. Gendry's face was set in determined lines, while Peter wove mild regret into his expression. "I offered him a place, Ser Derek. He refused. If the Lords of the Stormlands believe a trial by combat is the final word, then so be it. But I would still prefer an amicable solution." Lord Buckler cleared his throat. "What's this about a place for the lad? You'd let him remain as what, your castellan? That's hardly the seat of a Baratheon." Peter folded his hands calmly. "I would grant him a position of great honor and considerable authority, Master-at-Arms, perhaps, or High Steward of the Stormlands, something that recognizes his parentage without flouting inheritance law. He would have lands, income, influence. It's far more than most bastards ever receive." Gendry's scowl deepened. "As though you're tossing me scraps from my own father's table." One of Gendry's knights snarled. "The boy's father was a king. He deserves better than an underling's post." The crowd erupted again, half jeering, half cheering. Ser Derek lifted both arms, shouting for silence until the noise subsided. "Enough. Let us do this properly. By the old laws, if two claimants cannot agree, they may petition for a ruling by the king or the hand of the king. Failing that, they may settle it in the sight of gods and men by single combat or by champion. The question is, do either of you seek a royal decree before we come to blood?" Peter froze, mind flicking rapidly. The king, whoever currently sat the Iron Throne, might not be easily persuaded, and traveling to King's Landing for a hearing would allow for more meddling from all sides. By then, Gendry might gather enough allies to overrule Peter's claim. Or the king might decide to legitimize Gendry outright. That was an enormous risk. Gendry, for his part, looked uncertain. He knew the crown could legitimize him, but did he have enough pull to ensure that outcome? Robert was dead, no father remained to champion his cause before the royal court. To approach the king might be a gamble. And Gendry, not fully versed in politics, might think it simpler to rely on the Stormlands' traditions of might and challenge. The hush deepened, all eyes on Peter and Gendry. At length, Peter spoke in a quiet voice. "I place my faith in the Stormlands rather than the distant throne. If Gendry insists on seeing who is more worthy in the eyes of the gods, then let us do so. But let me be clear, I fight for the stability of these lands. If I fall, Gendry will be lord. If he falls, let there be an end to this debate." A hush, then a roar of approval from the more hot-blooded Stormland knights. They relished the drama of a fight. Gendry lifted his chin. "So be it. I'll fight you or your champion if you won't pick up a sword yourself." Peter met his gaze, allowing a flicker of regret. "I have no illusions of being a great warrior. If you insist on a test of arms, I will name a champion." He turned to Ralston Pike. "I thank you for volunteering. Will you stand for me if this is truly Gendry's will?" The Sellsword grinned. "With pleasure." Gendry's knights exchanged uneasy looks. Everyone in that hall knew Gendry was strong, but Ralston had the cunning and experience of a seasoned killer. A wave of dark excitement rippled through the crowd. This was the stuff of bardic tales, a showdown to decide a lordship. Derek's voice thundered once more, quieting the hall. "Then it is decided. At dawn 2 days hence, Gendry will face Ralston Pike in single combat, under the eyes of the Seven or the Old Gods if he prefers. The victor's claimant shall hold Storm's End uncontested." He exhaled, tension evident in his lined brow. "Pray the gods guide us to a just outcome." At that declaration, the hall erupted in speculation. Some were already placing wagers. Others shook their heads, muttering that it was too hasty. Peter watched Gendry, who glowered at him across the open space. The young man's pride had led him here. He could not walk it back now without appearing weak. Peter allowed a small, consoling smile to curl his lips as though pitying Gendry's choice. When the crowd's clamor had subsided somewhat, Ser Derek dismissed them. Many lingered in private clusters, doubtless plotting how to position themselves once the combat ended. Peter took the opportunity to slip away, returning to his chambers with Larys on his heels. Once the door was shut, Larry spoke in a low, urgent tone. "My lord, that Sellsword Pike is good, but Gendry, he's a beast in a fight, or so the stories say. Have you any plan to ensure Pike triumphs?" Peter moved to the window, gazing into the dark courtyard below. Servants carried torches, lighting the paths for departing guests. Ralston Pike is no ordinary brawler. He knows how to exploit weaknesses. Gendry might be strong, but raw strength can be turned against itself. I'll arrange for Ralston to have everything he needs. If we must tilt the scales further, we can consider some discreet measure, poison on the blade, or a well-timed accident. But that might be too obvious in a trial by combat. We must be subtle. Larys fidgeted. Some lords might question the outcome if the fight seems suspicious. Precisely. It must appear fair, or the Storm Lords will cry foul. And I would lose face before I even seized that seat. Peter's thoughts swirled. In a perfect world, Gendry's pride would lead him to a swift defeat, Ralston would spare his life, and Gendry would leave Storm's End in humiliation or accept Peter's earlier offer. But there was a chance Gendry could prove the stronger, particularly if the gods of chance favored him in an honest fight. Peter inhaled, steadying himself. We will rely on Ralston's skill and cunning. In the meantime, see if we can glean anything about Gendry's chosen weapon or his style in single combat. Knowledge is half the battle. Yes, my lord, Larys said, bowing. Peter crossed to the small table where the genealogical papers still lay. The seals were intact, the text unassailable. Even if Gendry won the duel, these documents would remain powerful. But the Stormlands, enthralled as they were with martial tradition, might still set law aside if Gendry emerged victorious in a show of raw might. He could claim the gods had chosen, and half the realm might agree. A single combat victory might trump 1,000 official seals in the hearts of these Stormlords. That was the risk. He set a hand on the parchment's edge, fingers trembling slightly with suppressed excitement. This was the crux of it, a clash between cunning and courage. For so long, Peter had orchestrated events from the shadows, letting others do the bleeding. This trial by combat forced him into the open, albeit by champion. Success or failure would come swiftly, not in the slow churn of political maneuvering. Yet even this uncertain crisis offered him advantage. Should Ralston win, Storm's End was his. Should Gendry win, Peter would not survive as the Stormlands lord, but he might still salvage some alliance or fallback. He never placed all his hopes in a single gambit. Night deepened and Peter paced the length of his chamber, ears pricked for the distant thunder that often rolled over these cliffs. For once, the sky was calm, as though the Stormlands itself held its breath. 2 days to arrange everything, 2 days for Gendry to brood and for the lords to pick sides. He could almost taste the intangible currents swirling through the fortress. The tension among the Storm Lords, the desire for a strong figure to lead them, these formed the bedrock of Peter's entire plot. Some lords would already be wagering in secret, hedging bets by sending discreet messages to Peter or Gendry, offering support in exchange for future favors. Indeed, the next 2 days would be a hive of clandestine meetings, bribes, and alliances. Storm's End might see more intrigue in that short span than it had in years of war. Peter snuffed out the candle, letting shadows envelop him. In that darkness, he whispered a soft promise to himself. Soon, the seat of House Baratheon would be his. He would not falter now. All the steps leading here had been carefully chosen. All that remained was to outmaneuver Robert's last living son in a final test of arms, preferably someone else's arms. If it came down to an honest fight, well, Peter Baelish had never played honestly, and he would not start now. The following morning dawned clear, with just a few streaks of cloud scudding across an indigo sky. Peter rose early and broke his fast with bread, hard cheese, and a cup of watered wine. Soon, his day began with whispered consultations. He met in secret with Ralston Pike, ensuring the Sellsword possessed the best arms and armor Storm's End could provide, all under the pretense of fairness. Peter quietly promised him a fortune if he emerged triumphant. Then he dispatched Larys to gather intelligence on Gendry's nightly routine, his sparring habits, anything that might give Pike an edge. Outside, the castle's wards were alive with anticipation. Word had spread of the upcoming trial by combat. The gathering of lesser lords swelled, as visitors from the Stormlands' outlying domains arrived specifically to witness the fight. Merchants set up stalls in the courtyard, hawking trinkets and refreshments. Minstrels wandered, singing ballads about Robert's rebellion or older tales of the Storm Kings. Everyone spoke in hushed or excited tones of Gendry's hammer, or of Peter Baelish's champion, rumored to have once served in the Golden Company. Bets were laid, alliances formed, arguments flared over whether law or blood carried more weight. Gendry himself could be seen in the practice yard, swinging his warhammer at straw dummies. The impact of metal on straw reverberated across the yard. Every blow was crushing, relentless. Peter watched from a second-floor window, expression cool. Skill with a hammer was formidable, but single combat was seldom as straightforward as hammering a dummy, especially when the opponent knew how to deflect or slip aside at the crucial instant. Later that day, Ser Derek summoned both Peter and Gendry to a small council chamber to finalize arrangements for the trial by combat. The chamber was austere, with high windows that let in a crisp breeze. Derek sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 lesser Stormland lords acting as impartial witnesses. Gendry arrived wearing a plain leather jerkin, his hair still damp from a recent wash. Peter came in neat velvet, perfectly poised. They exchanged the barest courtesy of nods. Derek cleared his throat. The trial is set for dawn tomorrow in the courtyard beneath the eastern wall. Lord Baelish, you have named Ralston Pike as your champion. Gendry, you will fight in your own stead. I, Gendry said, voice firm. One of the witnessing lords, a white-haired man with a wrinkled brow, asked, the rules of single combat are simple, but we must confirm the fight continues until one combatant yields or dies, unless a third party intervenes. Swords, shields, or other weapons are permitted so long as both sides agree. Gendry lifted his chin. I'll use my hammer. He can use sword, axe, whatever he likes. And if you die? Peter asked softly. Would you have me watch over your funeral rites or pass your belongings to a friend? Gendry snorted. Don't bother planning my funeral. I'm not the one who'll be carried out of that courtyard. Peter did not rise to the bait, he only nodded serenely. Then we are in agreement. Derek exhaled, eyeing them both. So be it. At dawn tomorrow, the courtyard with the garrison and any lords who wish to witness. The gods will decide the next Lord of Storm's End. With that, the meeting was adjourned. Gendry turned on his heel and left without another word, his hammer clutched in a meaty fist. Peter followed at a leisurely pace, exchanging only a curt bow with Derek. The tension in the castle was now so thick it seemed to oppress every corridor. That evening, the atmosphere felt like the calm before a storm. Most of the lords and knights were too keyed up for revelry. They dined quietly, hushed speculation on tomorrow's fight dominating their thoughts. Gendry ate only a meager supper, then returned to the practice yard, sweat gleaming on his brow as he ran through hammer drills under torchlight. Peter took a light meal in his chamber, letting his mind sift through the final arrangements. Larry slid into the chamber just as Peter was finishing a goblet of watered wine. The young messenger's face was drawn. My lord, rumor is Gendry's hammer once belonged to King Robert himself. The blacksmiths are saying it's near unstoppable if he catches you with a full swing. Peter nodded. It is unstoppable if it connects. But Pike will know how to keep his distance, slip in with a thrust when Gendry overcommits. Strength can be overmatched by finesse. Larry shifted nervously. And if that fails? Peter gave him a thin smile. Ralston has a few enhancements. I slipped him enough coin to buy the best black oil from the armory, which he can coat onto the edges of his blade. It's not poison, just a trick to cause extra friction and cut deeper. Not the sort of thing that would be noticeable at a distance, but it could turn a glancing blow into a crippling wound. Larry's exhaled. I see. Then there's nothing more to do. Only to wait, Peter said quietly, staring at the single candle flame on the table. By tomorrow's dawn, one of us will claim Storm's End. Night wore on in a restless hush. Peter retired early, but sleep did not come easily. Memories of duels he had witnessed long ago paraded through his mind, the savage swirl of steel, the screams of wounded men, the final blow that decided a life. He had never been a warrior. His weapons were secrets and lies, not swords. Even now, he depended on another's skill to secure his greatest ambition. There was an unease to that, a feeling that fortune might twist at the last moment. But he had no choice. This was the game the Stormlands demanded. At length, he drifted into fitful dreams, images of storms crashing against the battlements, Gendry's hammer smashing stone walls, King Robert's laughter echoing through halls of ghosts. Finally, dawn arrived. Peter rose, dressed in somber colors, and made his way to the courtyard. A chill wind blew in off the bay, carrying the roar of distant waves. The sky was streaked with pale gold and dusty pink, the sun just beginning to crest over the horizon. Storm's End's courtyard was already crowded with spectators, lords, knights, servants, even the smiths and stable hands. Many had found vantage points on the ramparts and the stairs. In a cleared circle near the eastern wall, fresh sand had been laid to provide footing for the duelists. Gendry stood there, hammer resting against his shoulder, expression somber. Opposite him, Ralston Pike tested the balance of his longsword. He wore simple plate armor with a close-fitting helm tucked under one arm, revealing a confident smirk. Peter stepped forward, meeting Pike's eye. They exchanged a nod. This was it. Ser Derek, flanked by 2 other knights acting as arbiters, lifted his hands. We stand in witness to a trial by combat. Gendry, son of King Robert, fights for his claim by blood. Ralston Pike fights on behalf of Peter Baelish, who claims a rightful lineage to House Baratheon. Let the gods judge who is more fit to bear the stag's banner. A hush fell. Derek stepped back, signaling the combatants to begin. For a heartbeat, neither man moved, gauging the other. The crowd watched, breath caught in collective throats. Then Gendry lunged with surprising speed, swinging his hammer in a brutal arc. Pike darted aside, the hammer's head slamming into the sand and sending up a small cloud of dust. Before Gendry could reset, Pike thrust with his longsword, aiming for Gendry's flank. Gendry twisted, letting the blade glance off the reinforced leather of his jerkin, but the blow drew a shallow line of blood. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Peter felt his pulse quicken. The black oil, he thought. Even a shallow cut could deepen if that edge had the extra friction. Gendry's eyes narrowed. He launched another assault, hammer feinting high, then coming in low. Pike barely sidestepped, the hammer grazing his leg armor with a clang. Pike riposted, aiming a slash at Gendry's shoulder. Gendry ducked, rolling away. Cheers and shouts erupted, lords encouraging one side or the other. The ring of steel and the thud of heavy blows echoed against the stone walls. Gendry pressed forward again, raw power fueling each strike. Pike dodged and countered with swift cuts, aiming to tire Gendry or catch him off balance. Gendry, however, was no novice. His footwork was clumsy compared to a knight's polished style, but his reflexes and sheer aggression compensated. Twice, Pike tried to slip inside the hammer's arc, only to be driven back by Gendry's thunderous swings. Sparks flew when the hammer met Pike's sword, the steel shrieking. Gendry bared his teeth, surging forward with unstoppable momentum. Pike retreated, eyes darting for an opening. Peter's heart hammered in his chest. This was not going as smoothly as he had hoped. Gendry's strength was formidable, his endurance unwavering. Then Pike stumbled, briefly losing footing in the churned sand. Gendry seized the moment, slamming the hammer downward. Pike twisted desperately, raising his longsword in a two-handed block. The impact forced Pike to one knee, his blade bending dangerously. A collective gasp from the crowd. If Pike's sword broke, it would be over in seconds. But Pike, with a grunt of effort, shoved upward, deflecting the hammer enough to roll away. He sprang to his feet, sword quivering from the abuse but still intact. Gendry, panting, turned to face him again, sweat matting his hair. Blood trickled from the shallow cut on Gendry's side, soaking into the fabric. Peter prayed the black oil had done its work. Soon, that small wound might hamper Gendry's movements, or so he hoped. The fight continued with brutal intensity. Pike landed another slash across Gendry's forearm, but it was glancing, drawing only a thin line of blood. Gendry roared, slamming his hammer into Pike's shoulder, denting the Sellsword's armor and sending him skidding backward. Pike barely retained his grip on the sword. The onlookers erupted in mixed cheers, some shouting Gendry, others, more quietly, rooting for the champion who fought for Peter's claim. Now both fighters were bleeding and winded. They circled each other, each searching for a decisive blow. Sweat dripped down Pike's face and Gendry's chest heaved. Peter clenched his teeth. This could go either way in a flash. Pike lunged, sword whistling. Gendry raised his hammer to parry, but Pike feinted at the last second, reversing direction in an elegant pivot. The blade caught Gendry's thigh. Blood spattered onto the sand and Gendry staggered. A cheer burst from some in the crowd. Pike pressed in, hacking at Gendry's raised hammer shaft, trying to drive him to the ground. But Gendry, half blinded by pain, bellowed and swung blindly, a desperate strike that caught Pike's torso. The Sellsword lurched with a pained grunt, stumbling backward, his breastplate caved in where the hammer struck. A crack of bone might have accompanied it. Pike fell to a knee, sword lowered, choking in agony. Silence gripped the courtyard. Gendry staggered closer, limping from the gash in his thigh, blood staining the sand. He raised his hammer, eyes blazing with fury. Pike coughed, spitting red. In that moment, Peter saw all was lost, Pike was done. A final hammer blow would end him. Without thinking, Peter strode forward, shouting, "Yield." Pike, yield? He would not let the man get slaughtered for naught. If Pike yielded, perhaps the lords would allow Peter to withdraw his claim. But Ralston Pike, perhaps too proud or too disoriented to heed Peter's command, snarled something incoherent and launched one last thrust from his kneeling position. The sword's tip drove into Gendry's side, piercing deeply into flesh. Gendry's eyes widened in shock. He gasped, coughing blood. Then, with a final burst of savage strength, he brought the hammer down onto Pike's head. The Sellsword's skull cracked beneath the metal and Pike collapsed into the sand, limbs twitching once before going still. Gendry stood there, swaying, the hammer sliding from his grasp. He tried to speak, but only a wet choke emerged. Blood gushed from the wound in his side. Pike's last blow had been mortal. Gendry dropped to his knees, fingers pressed to the gash, gazing helplessly at the red liquid pouring between them. The courtyard was absolutely silent. Peter felt his throat tighten. Both men dying at once? It was the worst possible outcome, no champion left standing, no clarity. Gendry toppled onto his back, breath rattling in his throat. A Stormlord knight ran forward, dropping to his knees, pressing a hand to the wound in a futile attempt to staunch the bleeding. Others rushed in, shouting for a maester. Ser Derek, white-faced, stared at the two fallen combatants. Pike was indisputably dead, skull-crushed. Gendry clung to life by a thread, but from the spreading pool of blood it seemed hopeless. Peter found himself caught in a wave of stunned confusion. If Gendry died, who would claim Storm's End? Peter's champion had also fallen, destroyed by Gendry's final blow. The trial by combat ended with neither side victorious in any conventional sense. A cry went up as the castle maester arrived, kneeling beside Gendry. The young man's breath came in ragged gasps, color draining from his face. The maester muttered instructions to a pair of nearby knights, who tried lifting Gendry to carry him inside. Gendry let out a strangled groan, the movement jarring his mortal wound. Peter's mind spun. If Gendry lingered on the brink of death, there might still be a fleeting chance to salvage a deal. He stepped forward, ignoring the stunned watchers, and crouched near the wounded man. "Gendry," he hissed, voice urgent. "Listen to me." The dying man's eyes flickered open. Pain and fear warred in his expression. If you acknowledge my claim," Peter murmured, "I will see you tended, ensure you have comfort, anything you need. If you survive, I—" Blood bubbled at Gendry's lips. He let out a ragged sound that might have been a scoff or a curse. Then his eyes rolled back, his chest shuddered, and he went limp. The maester pressed fingers to Gendry's neck, searching for a pulse. A heartbeat passed, too. Then the maester's face went grim. "He's gone," the old man said softly. A collective gasp of horror and sorrow spread through the courtyard. Gendry, King Robert's last known son, lay dead in a pool of blood, hammered and stabbed in a savage duel. Pike's corpse, equally still, offered no victory to Peter. For a moment, no one moved, as though the entire fortress grieved the final extinguishing of Robert's legacy. Peter rose to his feet, stunned. His grand plan had never accounted for a double fatality. Across the courtyard, many stared, uncertain what came next. Some lords might assume Peter won by default because Gendry died first, but Pike had died as well, leaving Peter without a champion to claim victory. Others might call it a draw or a sign from the gods that House Baratheon's line was truly ended. Ser Derek, at last, found his voice. "Both combatants are dead," he cried, his voice echoing in shock. "The trial by combat yields no clear victor." He trailed off, looking around at the gathered lords and knights. Peter realized with a cold wave of understanding that this was chaos, the very state he thrived in. Perhaps, in the confusion, he could still press his forged claim, unopposed by any living Baratheon. But the spectacle of Gendry's tragic end might also galvanize the lords against him, blaming him for the beloved bastard's demise. Already, a few knights were glaring his way as if he had orchestrated all this. Peter forced a composed mask onto his face. "A tragedy," he murmured, stepping forward. "We have lost King Robert's son. Let us at least spare his body further indignity." He gestured for the knights to lift Gendry onto a litter. "I will fund a proper funeral feast and tomb. He deserves that much." A flicker of rage passed through some. Others seemed too numb to protest. The onlookers parted, allowing the knights to carry Gendry's body away while two men hoisted Pike's corpse onto a makeshift cart. A stunned hush settled, broken only by the sobs of a serving girl who'd admired Gendry and the cause of distant gulls. Derek turned to Peter, voice low and urgent. "What now, Lord Baelish? There is no living Baratheon to claim Storm's End. Do your papers still stand?" Peter let out a long, trembling breath. "Yes. The law remains. My genealogical evidence is intact. But after this calamity, I'll not proclaim my lordship without at least consulting those present. I do not want to be seen as a vulture picking at bones." He could sense the watchers gazing at him with uneasy respect or veiled hostility. The hush pressed in on him, thick with the echoes of Gendry's last breath. He exhaled, aware that a single misstep could incite a riot or subservience. He spoke, voice firm yet tempered with sorrow. "Storm's End has suffered a terrible loss. With no surviving Baratheons, it falls upon me, as the last trace of that blood, to ensure stability and honor. I ask you, lords, knights, and good men, to allow me the chance to prove my worth as your lord. Let us mourn Gendry and bury him with all the respect due to King Robert's son. And then, let us move forward in unity, so that Storm's End does not fall into chaos." Ser Derek ran a hand over his face, nodding wearily. Others in the crowd exchanged uncertain looks. Yet Peter sensed the momentum building toward acquiescence. After all, no other contender stood. Gendry was gone. Pike was gone. The Stormlands needed a figurehead, and Peter Baelish, with his citadel-stamped lineage, was the only one left. In the silence that followed, a sudden gust of wind rattled across the courtyard, flicking droplets of blood-stained sand into the air. Peter straightened, feeling the eyes of the fortress upon him. This was not the triumphant coronation he had envisioned. It was a grim, bloody compromise. Yet it might suffice. In the aftermath of tragedy, men often grasped at a slender thread of order, and Peter Baelish was prepared to weave that thread into an unbreakable noose of power. Raising his voice so all could hear, Peter declared, "I will take no joy in this day. Let our first act be to honor Robert's last son with the dignity he deserves. Afterward, we can see to the matter of Storm's End's future. If the crown must confirm my seat, I will make the journey to King's Landing myself, bearing these documents. For now, I beg you all, remain calm. We must not let the Stormlands descend into further violence." A handful of lords murmured assent. Others hung back, eyes dark with doubt. Ser Derek inhaled slowly. "I'll stand witness to your claim, Lord Baelish. We cannot let this seat go leaderless. But I hope you'll be a better steward of the Stormlands than your Sellsword was a champion." Peter inclined his head, forcing down the surge of triumph that mingled with a strange regret. He thought of Gendry lying dead, a hammer that would never again strike steel. Perhaps the boy had deserved better, but the game was ruthless. Now the path lay open. No living Baratheon remained to challenge him. The Stormlords might grumble and scowl, but with the crown's official recognition, they would have no choice. And Peter Baelish would stand as the Lord of Storm's End, forging alliances with the Vale, weaving trade networks, and amassing power far beyond what he'd ever possessed. Amid the silent onlookers, a single gull circled overhead, its cry echoing across the cliffs. Peter looked up, catching a glimpse of the bird against the pale morning sky. Then he lowered his gaze, stepping across the blood-stained sand, careful not to mar his boots. The storm had passed, leaving a chill in the air and a castle in shock. But out of the wreckage of chaos, Peter Baelish had seized a prize beyond reckoning. And in the quiet corners of his soul, he whispered an unspoken vow to himself. He would not let go of the seat he had carved out with lies and the blood of a bastard Baratheon, no matter the cost. And so the new day in the Stormlands dawned on a lordship born of cunning and sealed by tragedy. Even as Gendry's body grew cold and Pike's cooled beside it, Peter Baelish stood poised to mold fate itself once again, this time from behind the crowned stag banner of House Baratheon, newly claimed and forever changed.